My brother stole my identity for a loan, then my family expected me to forgive him. I found out my brother stole my identity because a bank congratulated me on a loan I never applied for. At first, I thought it was a scam. I wish it had been. Instead, it became the biggest betrayal of my life. For context, my older brother, Ethan, had always been the favorite. Nobody in my family openly admitted it. They didn't have to. Everyone knew. If Ethan got into trouble, there was always an explanation. If I made a mistake, there were consequences. Growing up, I learned very quickly that different rules applied to him. Still, despite everything, we were relatively close. Or at least I thought we were. That illusion shattered on a random Tuesday afternoon. I was buying groceries when my credit card was declined. Not unusual. Cards malfunction. Systems crash. I used another card. That one was declined too. Now I was confused. Later that evening, I checked my credit report and nearly fell out of my chair. There was a loan listed under my name, a massive one. Nearly $85,000. My dollar's first reaction was disbelief. My second reaction was panic. I had never applied for any loan, never signed any paperwork, never spoken to that lender. I immediately contacted the bank. After verifying my identity, the representative sounded confused. According to their records, the loan application contained my information. My address, my employment history, my identification details, everything. Someone had practically become me. I assumed my identity had been stolen by a stranger, a hacker, a criminal, someone online. I never expected the truth. A week later, the bank sent copies of the application documents. I sat down at my kitchen table and started reviewing them. The paperwork looked legitimate, too legitimate. The applicant knew things very few people knew. Then I saw something strange, an emergency contact. My mother. That made no sense. Why would a random identity thief list my mother? I called her immediately. The moment I mentioned the loan, she went silent, not confused, not surprised, silent, and that terrified me. Because innocent people usually ask questions, my mother didn't. She simply said, "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding involving 85,000. Interesting. The conversation ended quickly, but my instincts were screaming. Something was wrong, very wrong. So I started digging. The next few days felt like a second full-time job. Phone calls, documents, credit reports, bank records. Eventually, I discovered where the loan money had gone, a business account. The account holder's name nearly made me choke. Ethan, my brother. I stared at the screen for almost a minute. No, absolutely not. There had to be another explanation. Maybe he borrowed money from someone else. Maybe his account received funds indirectly. Maybe anything. But the evidence kept piling up. Every road led back to him. Finally, I confronted him. I expected denial. Instead, Ethan looked annoyed. Annoyed, as if I were inconveniencing him. At first, he claimed it was temporary. Then he claimed he planned to tell me. Then he claimed he'd intended to repay everything before I noticed. Each explanation somehow became worse than the last. I asked the obvious question. Why would you use my identity? His answer still makes me angry, because apparently lenders wouldn't approve him. His credit was terrible. So he decided to use mine, like borrowing a lawnmower, not stealing someone's entire financial future. The argument exploded for nearly an hour, then he finally admitted it. He had used my information, without permission, without telling me, without considering the consequences. You'd think that would be the worst part. It wasn't. The worst part came later that night, when my parents called. I expected outrage, support, sympathy, anything. Instead, they wanted me to calm down. Apparently, Ethan was under pressure. Apparently, his business was struggling. Apparently, family should help family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My brother committed identity fraud, and somehow I was being treated like the difficult one. Over the next month, things became a nightmare. The loan damaged my credit. Mortgage approvals became impossible. Lenders started asking questions. Meanwhile, Ethan kept making promises. He'd fix it. He'd refinance it. He'd pay it back tomorrow, next week, next month. The deadline constantly moved. Then I learned something that changed everything. Because Ethan hadn't taken one loan, he'd taken three, using different variations of my information, different lenders, different accounts. The total wasn't $85,000 anymore. It was over $200,000 at dollars. That moment, I realized I hadn't discovered the entire scheme. I'd only discovered the first layer. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. Then came twist number 2. One lender sent me security footage from a branch visit connected to one of the applications. I expected to see Ethan. Instead, I saw someone else, someone helping him, someone sitting beside him during the application process, someone I trusted completely. My cousin Rachel. the same cousin who constantly preached about honesty, the same cousin who attended every family gathering, the same cousin who spent years acting like my biggest supporter. Suddenly, this wasn't just my brother. There were other people involved, and I had no idea how many. The following week, I hired an attorney. That decision sent shockwaves through my family. My parents accused me of overreacting. Ethan accused me of betraying him. Rachel suddenly stopped answering calls. Interesting timing. Then something happened I never expected. One evening, I received an anonymous email. No greeting, no explanation, just a single attachment, a spreadsheet. At first glance, it looked boring. Rows of numbers, transactions, account balances. Then I noticed a familiar name, Ethan, then another, Rachel, then another, my father. My stomach dropped. Because according to the spreadsheet, my father wasn't unaware of the loans. He was connected to them financially, directly. And the amounts involved were much larger than anyone admitted, far larger. I spent hours reviewing the file. The more I read, the more impossible it seemed. Millions of dollars had moved through accounts over several years. Not hundreds, not thousands, millions. And somehow my identity was only one small piece of a much bigger puzzle, a puzzle I wasn't supposed to see. That's when I realized the loan wasn't the real story. The loan was simply the mistake that exposed everything else. And once I understood what I was actually looking at, I stopped worrying about my credit score. Because suddenly I was worried about my entire family and what they had been hiding for years. I barely slept that night. The spreadsheet sat open on my laptop for hours. Every time I thought I understood what I was looking at, another detail made even less sense. There were dozens of transactions, money moving between accounts, business entities I'd never heard of, names of relatives, former business partners, even family friends. The biggest question wasn't where the money went. The biggest question was who sent me the file, because whoever leaked it clearly wanted me to see it. The next morning, I printed everything. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I met with a forensic accountant. Honestly, I expected him to tell me the spreadsheet was fake. Instead, after reviewing it for an hour, he looked concerned, very concerned. He explained that the transactions appeared authentic, not proof of wrongdoing, but definitely unusual. Then he pointed at something I had overlooked. Company name, one that appeared repeatedly throughout the records. I immediately recognized it, because it belonged to my father. Or at least I thought it did. Growing up, Dad always described it as a small consulting business. Nothing special, nothing dramatic. Yet according to these records, enormous sums had passed through it, far more than I'd ever imagined. Suddenly, my father's involvement didn't look accidental. It looked important. For the next week, I kept digging, and every answer created two new questions. Then came another twist. I discovered that Ethan's struggling business wasn't actually struggling, at least not recently. Public records showed several profitable contracts, large contracts, enough money to explain why he'd suddenly upgraded his car, rented a larger office, and started spending more freely. Which made no sense. If his business was doing well, why steal my identity? That question haunted me. Then I found the answer, and it was somehow worse than I expected. Ethan wasn't using the loans to save his company. He was using them to cover old debts, debts nobody in the family knew about. Years earlier, he'd made a series of terrible investments, risky projects, failed ventures, expensive mistakes. Instead of admitting failure, he'd borrowed more money, then more, then even more. By the time he used my identity, he was desperately trying to keep everything from collapsing. Like stacking chairs on top of a sinking boat, it wasn't a solution. It was panic. But then another discovery changed everything again. Because one of those old debts led directly back to my father, not as a victim. As a participant, I couldn't believe it, so I confronted him. For the first time in my life, I walked into my parents' house carrying evidence. Not accusations, evidence, bank records, transaction histories, corporate filings. The conversation lasted nearly 4 hours. At first, my father denied everything. Then he minimized it. Then he blamed misunderstandings. Eventually, the truth started leaking out, piece by piece. And every piece made the situation uglier. Years ago, Dad had helped Ethan start his first business. Nothing wrong with that. Lots of parents help their kids. But when the business ran into trouble, Dad quietly stepped in financially. Then again, then again. Each rescue became larger, more complicated, more secretive. Over time, Ethan became dependent on those bailouts. Instead of solving problems, he expected someone else to absorb them. And someone usually did, until nobody could anymore. That's when he turned to me, not because I was wealthy, not because I owed him anything, because I had excellent credit. To Ethan, I wasn't a brother. I was an opportunity. That realization hurt more than the financial damage. Then my father admitted something shocking. He knew Ethan planned to borrow money. He just didn't know Ethan would use my identity. At least that's what he claimed. Honestly, I still don't know whether I believe him. But before I could process that confession, my mother dropped a bombshell of her own. Apparently, Rachel wasn't helping Ethan. Rachel had been trying to stop him. I froze. What? According to my mother, Rachel discovered the identity theft months earlier. She threatened to expose him. Instead, Ethan convinced her he was about to fix everything. He promised repayment. He promised new financing. He promised solutions. So she stayed quiet. A terrible decision, but not the same as helping him. Suddenly, the security footage looked different. Maybe she wasn't assisting. Maybe she was trying to monitor the situation. The story kept changing. Every person seemed guilty of something. But not always the thing I originally assumed. Then, just when I thought I finally understood the full picture, I received another anonymous message. This time it contained a single sentence. Check the property records. That's it. No explanation, no signature, nothing. I almost ignored it, then curiosity won. A few hours later, I searched public property records. And that's when my entire understanding of the situation collapsed. Because I found a property purchased 3 years earlier. A property linked to one of the companies from the spreadsheet. The purchase price was enormous. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the ownership structure. My father's name, Ethan's name, and one additional name, mine. I nearly fell out of my chair. I had never purchased property with them, never signed documents, never authorized anything. Yet there I was, listed as a partial owner. At that moment, I realized the identity theft wasn't new. It hadn't started with the loans. It had started years earlier. The loans were simply the latest chapter. My information had apparently been used in ways I didn't even know existed. And if that was true, how many other documents carried my name? How many other transactions? How many other liabilities? For the first time, I wasn't angry. I was scared. Because I no longer knew where the damage ended. And then my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a number I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman introduced herself. She worked for a regulatory agency. She wanted to schedule a meeting regarding several transactions connected to my identity. My heart immediately sank, because agencies like hers don't call people for casual conversations. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. As far as we can tell, you may not be the only victim. Room went silent. What do you mean? There was a pause, then she replied. We believe multiple identities may have been used. And just like that, my brother's secret loan became something much bigger than a family betrayal, much bigger than damaged credit, much bigger than money, because whatever Ethan had been hiding, other people were now looking for answers too. The moment that phone call ended, I knew the situation had crossed a line. Up until then, this had felt like a family disaster, a betrayal, a financial nightmare, something messy but private. Now government investigators were involved, and suddenly the consequences felt very real. A week later, I attended the meeting. I expected accusations. Instead, the investigator spent most of the conversation asking questions. Did I authorize these loans? No. Did I sign these property documents? No. Did I have any business involvement with the companies listed? Absolutely not. The more questions she asked, the clearer one thing became. I wasn't under investigation. I was a witness, and potentially a victim. That was reassuring for about 5 minutes. Then she showed me a stack of documents. Every page carried my information, my name, my address, my employment history. Yet many of the signatures weren't mine. Some looked similar. Others didn't even try. Whoever created them assumed nobody would ever look closely. Unfortunately for them, people were looking very closely now. Then came the twist nobody saw coming. According to the investigator, several other identities appeared connected to the same network of transactions, not strangers. People connected to Ethan, former employees, business associates, even one distant relative. Apparently, my identity wasn't uniquely targeted. It was simply the most recent. The pattern stretched back years. At that point, I stopped wondering whether Ethan was desperate. This was too organized, too consistent, too long-running. Someone had been managing this operation carefully. The question was who? Because the more evidence appeared, the less convinced I became that Ethan was acting alone. Then another bombshell dropped. The anonymous person sending me information finally revealed themselves, and it was someone I never suspected. My Uncle David, my father's younger brother, the same uncle who rarely attended family gatherings. The same uncle everyone described as distant. The same uncle I hadn't spoken to in months. When we met, he looked exhausted, like someone carrying a secret for years, because that's exactly what he'd been doing. According to him, he started noticing irregularities long before I discovered the loan. At first, he assumed they were accounting mistakes. Then he found inconsistencies, then more inconsistencies, then entire transactions that didn't make sense. Every time he raised concerns, family members brushed him off. Eventually, he stopped asking questions publicly and started collecting records privately for years. The spreadsheet he sent me, that was only a fraction of what he had. He opened a briefcase. And suddenly I understood why he looked exhausted. The amount of documentation was unbelievable. Folders, receipts, financial statements, property records, years of records, enough to fill an entire table. Then he told me something that completely changed my perspective. The original problem wasn't Ethan. It was favoritism. That sounded ridiculous at first. Until he explained. Every time Ethan made a mistake, somebody protected him. Every time he created a problem, somebody fixed it. Every time consequences approached, somebody moved them away. Small mistakes became larger mistakes. Larger mistakes became bigger risks. And eventually those risks became disasters. Nobody intended to create a monster, but nobody stopped him either. For years, Ethan learned a dangerous lesson. Someone else would always clean up the mess. Unfortunately, that lesson eventually included me. Then came the family meeting. The one everyone had been demanding. My parents wanted peace. My relatives wanted answers, and honestly, I wanted closure. The meeting lasted nearly 6 hours. People cried, people argued, people interrupted each other constantly. Decades of resentment seemed to explode all at once. For the first time in my life, relatives openly discussed the favoritism, not quietly, not indirectly, openly. Stories emerged from every direction, missed consequences, excused behavior, broken promises, patterns I never noticed because I was too close to see them. Then Ethan finally spoke, and the room went silent. Because for the first time, he wasn't making excuses, no blaming investors, no blaming business partners, no blaming bad luck. He simply admitted the truth. The truth wasn't flattering. The truth wasn't dramatic. It was worse. He made one bad decision, then another, then another. Eventually, he became so focused on hiding previous mistakes that every new choice became about protecting the lie before it. Years passed. The lies grew. The risks grew. And eventually, the entire thing collapsed. The most shocking part, he didn't even try to justify using my identity. Not anymore. He simply admitted it was wrong, completely wrong, and that he knew it the moment he did it. My mother started crying. My father stared at the floor. The room felt heavier than I can describe, because sometimes hearing the truth doesn't make things better. Sometimes it just confirms how much damage was done. Then Ethan offered something nobody expected. He volunteered to transfer several assets, properties, business interests, equipment, anything necessary to repay the debts and repair the damage, not because anyone demanded it, because for once there was no other option. The following months were exhausting: lawyers, accountants, investigators, endless paperwork. But slowly, things started moving in the right direction. Fraudulent accounts were challenged, records were corrected, property issues were resolved, credit damage began to heal. The process wasn't fast, but it happened one step at a time. The funny thing is, people often ask whether I forgave him, as if forgiveness was a single decision, like flipping a switch. The reality was far more. Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing. I eventually stopped carrying the anger. That was for my own peace. But trust had to be earned again. And that took much longer. Some family relationships recovered. Others never fully did. Certain conversations remained uncomfortable. Certain wounds remained visible. That's the reality of betrayal. Even after problems are solved, consequences leave scars. Looking back now, the biggest lesson wasn't about money. It wasn't about identity theft. It wasn't even about Ethan. It was about what happens when people confuse helping someone with protecting them from consequences. Because every time someone removed a consequence for Ethan, they unknowingly helped create a larger problem, until eventually that problem landed on my doorstep. The loan may have been what exposed everything, but it wasn't what broke the family. Years of enabling did that. The loan was simply the moment nobody could pretend anymore. And honestly, that truth was harder to face than any financial loss ever could be.